Hello, my name is Amanda Hellman, and I am doing my case study on the school shootings at Columbine. For some background and contextual information on the subject, on April 20th, 1999, Eric Harris and Dylan Klebold walked into Columbine High School and opened fire. They killed 15 students, including themselves. And to this day, Columbine is known as one of the worst school shootings in history. It is known as one of the peaks of the school shootings. Eric Harris was born on April 9th, 1981 in Kansas. He was part of a military family, and they moved back to Colorado as an adolescent. Upon moving back to Colorado, Eric befriended Dylan Klebold. Dylan was a bit more of an outcast, but their interactions with each other and amongst other people seemed normal. There didn't seem to be any signs of mental illness or of any sort of violence at first. And then later on, the boys began to get in trouble for violent threats, accusations of bomb building, and then eventually they did plan their attack on Columbine. They put a great deal of thought into their planning, and they were seeking revenge for being bullied by their peers. The concept that we are studying that relates to this case study is the basic concept of murder. Murder is defined as the act of taking someone's life with a malicious afterthought. The two young men that committed the Columbine shooting committed a murder, and they also committed a premeditated murder. They had malice and ill intent. They were seeking revenge on their peers. They had intent to kill, and they planned this out well ahead of time. They put a lot of thought into it and a lot of planning, and the combination of the evil mind, the malice, and the premeditation classifies this as a premeditated murder, and it is also a mass murder. So the research application that I did in relation to this case study, I looked at a few different things. The school shootings in our society have become more and more of a problem. A lot of the research surrounding this type of murder focuses on forensic psychology and looks into the mental illness of the perpetrator. In most cases, the people who are committing the crimes do not openly appear to be suffering mental illness. Those around them oftentimes don't see any signs. A possible explanation is organizational deviance. Organizational deviance is when the expectations in the organization are not met by the organization itself, causing a harmful outcome. So the fact that nobody in the school really noticed any of the behavior that the boys were displaying, never really noticed a problem, could potentially classify it as organizational deviance. Another piece of research is the fact that children are exposed to violence at young ages through video games and television. This exposure desensitizes them to violence that may otherwise send red flags. Early exposure to violence could put them at higher risk to commit a violent crime such as murder or mass murder. There is also an increasing concern in the public about the access to the firearms. Youth should not have access to such firearms as were used in Columbine, but they do. Youth seem to easily be able to get a hold of weapons, and they are using the weapons to commit murders. So the contributions to academic theory that this case study shows, in my opinion, there are a couple. One of them is the concept of victim precipitation. Victim precipitation theory says that the victim initiated an interaction that ultimately led to their death. This can be a direct interaction or an indirect interaction. In the case of Columbine, the victims had interacted with the offenders daily. They either ignored the offenders or in some cases they bullied the offenders. Therefore, the indirect actions of the peers could have contributed to the mentality of the shooters, and it could have contributed to the murders. Also, This case relates to the concept that victims are often murdered at the hands of someone that they know, typically an acquaintance or a friend, even a loved one. In this particular case, it would be acquaintances, potentially friends. 26% of murder victims were acquainted with their attacker. And in the years of 1980 to 2016, over 60,000 juveniles were murdered. This included the teens that lost their lives in Columbine. And the third contribution is the idea of mass murder. This was a mass murder where they went in and killed 13 people plus themselves. So all of those are the contributions to the academic theory. The challenges to academic theory that this case presents are also a couple. One of the challenges is the conceptions about murder. For example, Marvin Wolfgang studied murder in a large city environment, and he concluded that most murders are committed by young African Americans who have a low social standing. This was not the case in Columbine. In fact, it was almost the exact opposite. The offenders were middle-class white teens, and the victims in the school were also middle-class white teens. This did not fall into that stereotype at all. Secondly, there is a theory that juveniles have a lower homicide rate, and typically the homicide rate amongst juveniles is lower. Therefore, the fact that it was teens and juveniles that committed this murder goes a little bit against the norm of the theory. The third point is that most mass murderers are serial killers who are sociopathic or mentally diseased. This theory also doesn't really fall completely in line with the Columbine. The young men did not show signs of being sociopathic or mentally diseased. They were perceived as normal teens. Closer to the time of the school shooting, there were some signs of mental illness, but most of the time that they were in school and interacting with peers, they were not perceived as mentally ill, and they did not come across as mentally ill or sociopathic, and these two would not be considered serial killers. And here is a list of my references with hyperlinks for anybody who might want to check them out. Thank you.